What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Napoleon Dynamite. Let me start this off by saying a huge thank you to my guest here in this video for joining me, and that is my buddy Mike from his channel Did You See That? He covers all things movies, does vlogs, as well as really has a special place on his channel for the Back to the Future franchise because he's a huge fan, easily the biggest Back to the Future fan that I know. So please go check him out. The link to his channel is down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you, and we're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit. And what's really interesting about this collab is that Mike actually has a very specific reason for why he never saw this movie. And when he told me that, I love this movie. And I always kind of want to spread this movie out to people who have never seen it, even if I don't really know if they're going to like it or not. So I asked Mike to join me on this, despite the reason that he had why he had never seen it. And so we're going to hear about that in just a little bit. He's going to talk a little bit about kind of the journey with this movie in a little bit. But a big thanks to him for, taking the time out of his life to watch this movie and review it, even though he wasn't necessarily thrilled to do so when we originally talked about it. So Napoleon Dynamite, 2004. I cannot believe it's been as long as it has been since this movie came out. When this movie came out, I loved it. This movie was right up my alley as a kid, and this director, I just was completely and utterly sold on his vision between this movie and Nacho Libre. The director's name is Jared Hess, and my buddy Mike is actually going to talk a little bit more about kind of the origins of how Napoleon Dynamite actually ended up happening in just a little bit. But for now, let's just jump right into my thoughts. I've already talked about Nacho Libre here on the channel, which came out after Napoleon Dynamite, but I was very open in that video about the fact that I love Nacho Libre, I love Napoleon Dynamite, and what I love about these films is that Jared Hess has a very specific comedic tone in his films, the way that he shoots things, the way that he chooses to kind of angle things, the way that he chooses to direct the actors to say their lines. There's just a specific feel and vibe to his films that just kind of gives you this off-the-cuff kind of weird feeling comedy movie. And as a kid, it was right up my alley. Really over-the-top, stupid, silly, very self-aware comedy has always been something I've really thoroughly enjoyed when executed properly. And for me, Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre are two of my favorites. Now, of course, right out of the gate, anything that's comedy related, it's going to be a gamble on whether or not it's going to be funny for everybody. So if you're watching this review and you're thinking, Anthony, I just don't jive with you. I'm listening to your thoughts, but I just don't jive with what you have to say about Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre. I can't say I blame you. This, without a doubt, like most comedies, is going to be a very subjective experience. And so it's not going to be a comedy that's going to work for everybody. But for me, I love it. And this humor is right up my alley. I love the way that Nacho Libre and Napoleon Dynamite are made. And yeah, I'm going to kind of leave Nacho Libre in the past now and get specifically into Napoleon Dynamite. This film for me as a kid was just one of the most quotable films that came out at the time. I just remember tons of people walking around with the Vote for Pedro shirts and just overall quoting this movie. And I was along for the ride. There were so many quotable lines in this film that I was throwing out left and right in my middle school and high school days. And just overall, I just have a very fond place in my heart for this film. I still have my original DVD for the film that has kind of one of those holographic images on the front where Napoleon Dynamite is dancing at the talent show. And yeah, this is just a movie that has a very special place in my heart. Like I mentioned, there's a very specific tone to the film. There's a very specific way that the actors are delivering their lines, the way that the camera is set up. There's almost like a kind of nasty, grimy feel to certain things, or kind of like an unclean feel. There's an unpristine feel to a lot of this film. And I think that's part of the appeal of the movie, is that it's just weird. It's a very weird and wacky film. It doesn't really have your traditional 3-act structure, but this is one of those few films where that really works for me. You don't really have a very focused narrative with a beginning, middle, and end where these characters are going on a journey. Pretty much this movie is just following the life of a couple of weird individuals in high school that kind of, take a liking to one another, and they just kind of go throughout the course of the movie doing different high school things. And, for the most part, a lot of the film feels very aimless. But by the time you get to the end of the movie, you're just really into the characters and what has been happening. It's a very goofy, weird watch. And again, I know 100% that this is not a movie that works for everybody. So this isn't one of those movies that I can love and praise here on the channel and say, I think you'll love it. I think it's very important to know going into it, if you've never seen it before, that it's going to be a bit of a bizarre film. A lot of the lines of dialogue, the performances, the the overall feel and vibe. A lot of the dead moments where there's a lot of just open air, a lot of silence in the film, kind of these awkward moments that are built up. Yeah, it's for a very specific audience of comedy moviegoers. And so that's either going to work for you or it's not going to work for you. But for me, it always has worked. And yeah, like, you know, to talk even really about the premise is kind of funny because you have Napoleon Dynamite who meets Pedro. That's where the whole vote for Pedro thing comes out. And, you know, majority of this film is just kind of us seeing the home life of Napoleon. He has this hilarious brother Kip who thinks he's like the coolest, most badass guy in the world, but he's the dweebiest dude in the world, and ends up falling in love with this, you know, black woman that is just completely just the looking at them, you know, the contrast between the two of them is just so funny. And just overall, this movie just kind of goes for bizarre, it goes for weird, it goes for awkward, and I just always thoroughly enjoyed kind of the way that they approach things. If I had to say between Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre, which are very, very similar in tone, I would probably have to lean more for Nacho Libre. I think it's a movie that overall has a better story, has a more streamlined narrative from beginning, middle to end, and adopts those same very quirky, very weird elements that Napoleon Dynamite has, but in a stronger story. Whereas Napoleon Dynamite doesn't really feel focused. It doesn't really feel like a film with a real narrative. You know, there are things happening. You have Pedro running for class president. You know, you have things like the talent show. That's probably one of the more iconic moments of this film. And majority of the film, though, really is just Napoleon and his family just kind of living life. And so, yeah, you know, this is a very simple film narratively, but there's something about it and its tone and its feel that just makes it a classic for me. Now, I didn't mean to ramble so long in the earlier part of this review, but let's go ahead and jump straight into Mike's thoughts over at Did You See That?
If there was one person in this universe right now that I talk to every single day who could make me ever watch Napoleon Dynamite, it is the legend Anthony A. Perez. Hey everyone, what's going on? Thank you so much, Anthony, firstly, for having me on this collaboration of Napoleon Dynamite. So I've actually never seen this movie, and there's a very specific reason why, and I'm going to open up to you guys and let you know a little bit more about me and why I've never actually checked out this movie. It's not because I've never really wanted to, it's actually due to a past experience that I had when I was around 18 years old. So let's throw it back to a time where I actually worked at an Italian restaurant for maybe a couple of months or so. Now, at the time, I wasn't a very outgoing, confident person. I was quite shy. I was just coming out of college and leaving college and kind of just finding my feet in the working reality. Now, when I actually was at this restaurant, what actually happened was this guy whose name I generally can't remember, basically, on one of the shifts, he told me, could I take a photo of you? And I was thinking, well, that's a little bit weird. Even back then, I thought, well, that's a little bit weird. And again, I'm talking about 13, 14 years ago. It's like, right, okay, yeah, sure. So he took a photo. I just stood still, took a photo, and he was laughing at one of the girl co-workers, and one of the other girls was like, delete that picture, it's not fair. And I was like, well, what's this all about? And he's like, have you ever seen the film Napoleon Dynamite? And I said, no, I've never seen it. And he's like, well, you look like Pedro. And he's like, do you know, vote for Pedro? And I was like, no, I don't know what that is. But I later came to realise that it was kind of like a racial slur. So being honest with you, that one little negative experience in my lifetime has stopped me or even wanting me to watch this movie. And I told Anthony about this as well. And he then said, well, look, man, like, if you would do me the honour, I would love for you to be a part of this collaboration and talk about the movie. If you want to mention that story, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So yeah, anyway, guys, that's just a little bit of a story about me. But anyway, besides all that, you want to hear my opinion, and here it is. Let's take it back to the summer of 2003 at Sundance Film Festival. At Sundance Film Festival, Jared Hess presented a 9-minute movie called Peluca. It was very similar to Napoleon Dynamite, and after the success of this very short movie, Jared Hess was approached by Fox Searchlight Pictures, and they said, wow, look, let's make this into a feature. So later on, with a $400,000 budget, they made Napoleon Dynamite, which, by the way, Jon Heder, the main actor who plays Napoleon Dynamite, got paid $1,000 for this role, which is absolutely insane, because nowadays something like that would be Jon Heder suing Fox/Disney because the movie came on to be a financial and cult success, making $46 million at the box office. But to be honest with you, a year later, Jared Hess, who, by the way, it's a shame that this guy isn't directing as much nowadays because he had 2 movies off the bounce that was box office successes. He had Napoleon Dynamite and then another film after this, Nacho Libre. But anyway, the movie stars Jon Heder. It also stars Efren Ramirez, and we've also got Haley Duff, because when I first saw her in this movie, I was like, she looks very familiar. Yeah, it turns out it's Haley Duff's older sister. Figure, right? Anyway, what can I honestly say about Napoleon Dynamite very quickly? Well, for the most part, this movie, I have to say, has got probably one of the most biggest cultural divides ever in terms of comedy. Now, comedy is always subjective, and you're always going to have that in any kind of comedy movie style, whatever the case may be. But this one, it certainly appeals to a certain kind of humour and certain kind of personalities. I guess that's probably the fairest way to say that. I certainly found some enjoyment in the movie, but I wouldn't really say I'm head over heels crazy or kind of like a laugh per minute with this movie, unfortunately. At points, it certainly had great elements, and definitely the best and regard aspect of this movie is Jon Heder, Efren Ramirez, and Haley Duff, as I mentioned before. Those 3 together are fantastic in this movie, but I've also got to acknowledge that this movie franchise as such created a legacy since 2003 as that little short movie as Peluca. Napolen Dynamite also got an animated TV series with those original cast returning to do the voice work in that animated series, and also they're discussing about a potential Napoleon Dynamite 2, which is crazy and would lead off to the ending of this movie. So that could be very interesting, you know, around 20 or so, nearly plus years later, making a sequel. But overall for this movie, there's certainly elements in here that was kind of like so bad it's good kind of moments for me. Now, I don't know if that was the original intention of Anthony kind of thinks the same, but for me, I got that kind of vibe to this movie. But it was also a movie I can also appreciate because it has kind of like a certain very, very unique comedy style that I've personally not seen replicated in a movie to this day. Now, that could be because of like the subject matter in this or how this was maybe interpreted. I'm really not too sure. So I can certainly have a newfound respect for this movie, and I'm actually so glad I've watched it for the first ever time. I wouldn't really say it's a one that I want to revisit time and time again, but I can completely appreciate and respect the cultural significance that this movie has generated and had ever since its launch. And as I mentioned before, if you get a chance to either watch Napoleon Dynamite or Nacho Libre, yeah, Nacho Libre is definitely going to be the one for me. So with that in mind, Anthony, thank you so much for having me onto this collaboration, my man. It's been an honour and truly a blessing to have a chance on your channel once again, because I always love talking about a movie with you, man. But with that in mind, let me hand it over to the legend that is Anthony A. Perez. And subscribe to his channel if you already haven't.
A big thanks to Mike for being here in this video. Loved hearing your thoughts, man, and just love that you were willing to put kind of your negative viewpoint on this film behind you and, you know, obviously give this movie a watch and join me here for this video. Loved hearing your thoughts. And like you said, it's not something that necessarily blew your socks off. It wasn't necessarily something that you loved as far as a comedy. And I can't say I'm surprised again. I don't think this is a movie that I could ever just necessarily be like, oh my God, you didn't think it was funny, you didn't like it. Most comedy is subjective. It's one of the most subjective forms of films in general, in my opinion. But yeah, you know, a film like this specifically is just so weird that it very much just calls to a very specific audience. And so you're either going to love it or you're either going to hate it. And so I'm glad that you were able to still appreciate it and enjoy elements about the film. And it was just awesome to hear you be able to open up about why you haven't seen this film. And now that you've seen the film, obviously, hopefully your perspective has changed on this film a little bit. But yeah, you know, to wrap up my thoughts on Napoleon Dynamite, it's a silly, dumb film. I find this film to just be a good time, and the way that it's filmed, the way that the performances are laid out, the delivery of lines, the lines themselves, the way that the actors are portrayed, or the way that the characters are portrayed, the way that the director directed the actors to play these roles, I just think they all do a really great job of really honing in on a very specific, tight tone that very much feels fluid throughout the course of the film. Is it a little bit aimless at times? Is it a movie with a 3-act structure that you're going to walk out with this great story that is going to make you smile throughout? Maybe not, but it is a really goofy movie, and I think if you're just looking for something a little bit strange, a little bit off the cuff, something maybe you've never seen before, which I would be surprised to hear that a lot of people haven't seen this movie, but if you haven't, I do recommend it on that level. But you know, I think it's very important to know going into this movie that it's not going to work for everybody. It's not a film that's going to be just completely accessible for all types of comedy lovers. It's a movie that very much is for a very specific audience of comedy lovers, and I know plenty of people who love this movie and plenty of people who do not love this movie, and plenty of people like Mike that kind of fall somewhere in the middle. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. A big thanks to Mike from Did You See That for joining me here in this video. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. But for now, I'll go ahead and ask you guys a question. Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Do you find it funny? Do you not find it funny? Leave any and all those comments down below in the comment section. Hit that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one, all right? Bye-bye.